What if I told you that one of the Bible's most shocking moments of divine judgment still stands today? That somewhere in the barren wilderness of the Middle East, a pillar of salt continues to bear witness to an ancient act of disobedience that changed everything. For thousands of years, skeptics have dismissed the story of Lot's wife as mere folklore, a cautionary tale wrapped in mythological clothing. They've argued that no woman could literally be transformed into salt, that such stories belong to the realm of fairy tales, not historical fact. But what happens when faith collides with archaeology, when ancient texts point us toward physical evidence that refuses to be ignored? Today, we're venturing into one of the most mysterious regions on Earth, the Dead Sea Basin, where the line between the miraculous and the geological becomes startlingly thin. This is a place where biblical drama unfolded against a backdrop so unique, so perfectly suited to the story, that even secular scientists pause to wonder at the coincidence. The question that burns before us isn't just whether Lot's wife became a pillar of salt. It's whether that pillar, standing lonely and defiant against time itself, might still be there, waiting to tell its story to anyone bold enough to seek it out. If you're ready to journey into one of archaeology's most compelling mysteries, hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what we've uncovered. To understand what we're looking for, we must first return to the source. Genesis chapter 19, one of the most dramatic passages in all of Scripture. The stage is set in the cities of the plain, where Sodom and Gomorrah have become synonymous with corruption so complete that divine judgment becomes inevitable. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land. But before this apocalyptic destruction, we witness an act of divine mercy. Two angels appear to Lot, Abraham's nephew, with an urgent warning. Flee for your lives, and whatever you do, don't look back. The Hebrew text is crystal clear. Al-Tabet Acharecha, do not gaze behind you. This isn't a suggestion. It's a divine command, carrying the weight of life and death. Yet in that moment of terror and confusion, as sulfur rained from the sky and the earth itself seemed to tear apart, Lot's wife made a choice that would echo through eternity. Genesis 19:26 records it with haunting simplicity. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. The text offers no metaphorical language, no poetic embellishment. It presents this transformation as literal fact, as real as the destruction consuming the cities behind them. Ancient readers would have understood this as historical record, not symbolic storytelling. To comprehend the full impact of this account, we must understand the extraordinary geography where these events unfolded. The Dead Sea, known in biblical times as the Salt Sea, occupies the lowest point on Earth's surface, more than 1,400 feet below sea level. This isn't just any body of water, it's a geological marvel that defies life itself. With salinity levels reaching 34%, nearly 10 times saltier than the ocean, nothing can survive in these waters. Fish die instantly upon contact. Birds avoid flying too low over its surface. Even bacteria struggle to exist in this hypersaline environment. The very name Dead Sea captures a profound truth. This is a place where life meets its limits, yet this seeming wasteland sits adjacent to what was once the fertile Jordan Plain, described in Genesis as being like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. The contrast is stark and significant. Paradise and judgment existing side by side, separated by mere miles. The region's geology tells a story of violence. Tectonic forces have created a rift valley where the Earth's crust continues to tear apart. Mineral deposits, underground salt domes, and evidence of seismic activity paint a picture of a landscape shaped by catastrophic forces, exactly the kind of environment where biblical accounts of fire and brimstone might find their geological foundation. Ancient trade routes crisscross this region, making it a crossroads of civilizations. The strategic importance of the Dead Sea Basin meant that whatever happened here would be witnessed, remembered, and passed down through generations. Rising from the southern shores of the Dead Sea stands one of the most bizarre geological formations on Earth, Mount Sodom. But calling it a mountain misleads us entirely. This towering ridge, stretching 5 miles long and reaching 700 feet into the sky, isn't made of rock at all. It's pure salt, a massive dome of halite pushed upward by geological forces over millions of years. Geologists classify Mount Sodom as a salt diapir, a formation so rare that only a handful exist worldwide. Unlike traditional mountains carved by volcanic activity or tectonic collision, this giant was born from ancient seas that evaporated, leaving behind layers of salt that eventually broke through the surface like a mineral bubble rising through stone. The erosion patterns here create landscapes that seem almost alien. Wind and rain carve the salt into fantastic shapes: caves, arches, and most remarkably, towering pillars that stand like sentinels across the desert floor. The white and beige formations catch the harsh Middle Eastern sun, creating an otherworldly glow that makes the entire ridge appear supernatural. Even secular geologists admit they've never seen anything quite like Mount Sodom. Dr. Amos Frumkin, a leading Israeli geologist, has called it one of the most unique salt formations on the planet. The fact that ancient peoples would associate this place with divine judgment seems less superstitious when you stand in its shadow. It's a landscape that demands an explanation. Local Bedouin tribes have always linked Mount Sodom directly to the biblical narrative. For them, there's no separation between the geological marvel they witness and the ancient story their ancestors preserved. The mountain itself becomes a testimony written in salt and stone. At the southern tip of Mount Sodom, standing in haunting isolation, rises what local tradition has known for millennia as Lot's wife, a solitary column of salt that bears an unmistakable resemblance to a human figure frozen in time. This isn't just any salt formation. The pillar stands approximately 20 feet tall, with proportions that eerily mirror those of a woman caught in mid-stride, her form turned back as if looking over her shoulder. The natural sculpting of wind and rain has created what appears to be draped clothing, a bent posture, and even facial features that from certain angles seem almost lifelike. What makes this formation particularly remarkable is its solitary nature. While other salt pillars dot the landscape of Mount Sodom, most cluster together or appear as part of larger formations. This pillar stands alone, separated from the mountain itself, positioned as if someone had been fleeing the destruction and stopped, forever frozen in that moment of fatal hesitation. The site has been considered sacred for centuries. Byzantine pilgrims, Islamic travelers, and Jewish scholars all made reference to visiting this specific formation. It's not hidden away in some remote corner of the wilderness. It stands prominently, almost defiantly visible to anyone approaching the southern Dead Sea region. Modern tourists and pilgrims continue to visit the site, many reporting an inexplicable sense of solemnity when they stand before the pillar. Photographers struggle to capture its full impact. Something about its proportions, its positioning, and its stark isolation against the barren landscape creates an emotional response that transcends mere geological curiosity. The pillar's significance isn't built on modern tourism or recent archaeological speculation. Historical witnesses spanning 2 millennia have recorded their encounters with this same formation, creating a documentary trail that bridges the ancient and contemporary worlds. Josephus Flavius, the first-century Jewish historian whose works preserve crucial details about biblical-era Palestine, wrote with startling specificity, "I have seen this pillar of salt, and it remains at this day." This wasn't hearsay or distant tradition. Josephus claimed personal, eyewitness testimony. For a historian known for his careful documentation, this represents significant evidence. Early Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land regularly included Mount Sodom in their itineraries. The Bordeaux pilgrim, writing in 333 AD, referenced the salt formations and their connection to the biblical narrative. The Piacenza pilgrim, visiting around 570 AD, provided detailed descriptions that match modern observations of the area. Rabbinic literature preserves even more ancient traditions. The Talmud contains discussions about the pillar, debating its nature and significance. These weren't abstract theological speculations, but conversations grounded in the assumption that the formation existed and could be visited. Islamic tradition adds another layer of historical witness. Medieval Muslim geographers and travelers wrote about the region, often calling it Bar Lut, Lot Sea, and referencing the salt formation as a recognized landmark. The consistency across religious and cultural boundaries suggests a shared historical memory rather than isolated myth-making. The archaeological significance of this documentary chain can't be overstated. When sources separated by centuries, cultures, and even religious conflicts all point to the same geographical features, historians take notice. Here's where our story takes a remarkable turn, because modern archaeology has begun uncovering evidence that the biblical account might be more historically grounded than critics ever imagined. Dr. Stephen Collins and his team from Trinity Southwest University have been excavating Tel El Hammam in the Jordan Valley, a site they believe represents biblical Sodom. What they've discovered challenges every assumption about the cities of the plain being mere legend. The archaeological layers reveal a prosperous Bronze Age city that suffered sudden, catastrophic destruction around 1700 BCE, precisely matching biblical chronology. But it's not just the timing that's remarkable, it's the nature of the destruction. The excavation has uncovered evidence of intense heat that melted pottery and mud bricks into glass-like materials. Sulfur balls, pure brimstone, have been found scattered throughout the destruction layer. The city's defensive walls show signs of having been blasted apart by forces far beyond normal warfare. Similar evidence has emerged from other sites in the southern Dead Sea Basin. Bab Edra and Numeira show identical patterns: sudden abandonment, fire damage, and geological evidence pointing to seismic activity coinciding with human habitation. The archaeological timeline suggests these cities were destroyed simultaneously, not gradually abandoned or conquered over time. Perhaps most intriguingly, soil samples from these sites reveal unusual mineral compositions, consistent with the theory that underground deposits of sulfur and bitumen could have been explosively released during seismic events. The Dead Sea region sits atop massive petroleum and natural gas reserves that, under the right geological conditions, could produce exactly the kind of fiery destruction described in Genesis. The archaeological evidence doesn't prove divine intervention, but it certainly confirms that the biblical writers were describing real places that suffered real, catastrophic destruction during the time frame the text claims. Before we conclude that divine intervention created Lot's wife, we must understand what science tells us about salt pillar formation. The geology of erosion can indeed create formations that mimic human or animal shapes, a phenomenon geologists call pareidolia, our tendency to see familiar patterns in random natural formations. Salt erosion follows predictable patterns. When exposed to wind and rain, halite dissolves unevenly, creating vertical columns where harder layers protect softer salt beneath. The process can take thousands of years, but the results often display surprising artistry. Mount Sodom provides perfect conditions for this type of formation. Consistent weather patterns, varying salt densities, and minimal vegetation to interrupt the erosion process. Worldwide, salt pillars exist in other locations. The Danakil Depression in Ethiopia, the Atacama Desert in Chile, and even formations in Utah display similar phenomena. Human-like shapes, while rare, aren't impossible. Nature occasionally sculpts with an artist's eye, creating formations that seem too purposeful to be accidental. However, Mount Sodom's pillars display unusual characteristics that have puzzled geologists. The formations here are taller and more stable than typical salt erosion would predict. Dr. Frumkin's studies reveal that some pillars have maintained their basic shapes for centuries despite the region's harsh weather, a geological longevity that defies normal expectations for salt formations. The question becomes not whether salt pillars can form naturally, they obviously can, but whether the specific pillar, known as Lot's wife, represents normal geological processes or something more extraordinary. The formation's positioning, proportions, and remarkable preservation suggest we're dealing with either an incredibly rare geological coincidence or something that transcends normal natural processes. Let's pause here for a moment. If you're finding this investigation as fascinating as we are, take a second to hit that like button and share this video with friends who appreciate the intersection of faith and science. Now let's explore what all this evidence might mean spiritually. Whether we interpret Lot's wife's transformation as literal historical fact or profound spiritual metaphor, the message embedded in her story speaks across millennia with startling relevance. Her backward glance represents something deeply human and deeply dangerous. The Hebrew concept behind looking back carries layers of meaning beyond simple physical turning. It suggests longing, attachment, and the inability to fully embrace God's call to move forward. Lot's wife wasn't just curious, she was conflicted. Part of her remained tied to the life she was leaving behind, even as divine judgment consumed it. This hesitation between salvation and destruction, between obedience and rebellion, captures one of Scripture's central themes. The pillar of salt becomes a permanent reminder that partial obedience isn't obedience at all. Half-hearted escape from sin still results in spiritual death. Salt itself carries rich biblical symbolism. It preserves, it purifies, and it endures. When Jesus called his followers the salt of the earth, he was referencing this preservative quality. Ironically, Lot's wife achieved a twisted kind of preservation, eternal existence as a warning rather than a blessing. Her fate parallels other biblical figures who hesitated at crucial moments, like Moses striking the rock instead of speaking to it, or like King Saul's incomplete obedience in destroying the Amalekites. Lot's wife discovered that proximity to salvation doesn't guarantee participation in it. Standing near the righteous doesn't make one righteous. The spiritual lesson transcends religious boundaries. Every human faces moments when moving forward requires leaving something behind. Career changes, relationship decisions, moral choices, all demand the courage to resist looking back at what we're losing and focus instead on what we're gaining. Lot's wife's pillar fits into a broader biblical pattern, where physical landmarks preserve spiritual truths. Throughout Scripture, God consistently uses material objects and geographical locations to anchor abstract spiritual lessons in concrete reality. Consider the burning bush on Mount Sinai, a physical phenomenon that conveyed spiritual truth about God's holiness and Moses' calling. Secular science might explain the bush through natural gas emissions or phosphorescent minerals, but the spiritual significance transcends the geological mechanism. The parting of the Red Sea provides another parallel. Whether accomplished through miraculous intervention or extraordinary tidal conditions combined with underwater ridge formations, the physical event became a permanent memorial to God's deliverance. The Israelites placed physical stones as monuments to ensure future generations would remember what happened there. The stone tablets containing the Ten Commandments represent divine law made tangible. The Ark of the Covenant served as a physical focal point for God's invisible presence. Even Jesus himself represents this pattern. Eternal God made flesh, abstract divinity given physical form, so humanity could comprehend and interact with the divine. In each case, spiritual truth finds expression through material reality. The physical doesn't diminish the spiritual, it amplifies it. A geological salt pillar can simultaneously be a natural formation and a divine testimony. The two explanations don't necessarily conflict. They may complement each other. This pattern suggests that seeking archaeological evidence for biblical accounts isn't faithless skepticism, but faithful investigation. If God consistently works through physical means to communicate spiritual truths, then we should expect to find material traces of biblical events embedded in the landscape itself. The pillar of Lot's wife, whether literally her transformed body or a divinely appointed natural formation, continues this biblical tradition of making the invisible visible, the eternal temporal, and the spiritual physical. Today, any traveler can visit Mount Sodom and witness the pillar that tradition calls Lot's wife. Modern tourism has made the site accessible through guided tours from Jerusalem or direct routes along the Dead Sea Highway. GPS coordinates pinpoint the exact location where this solitary column stands against the desert sky. Contemporary photographs reveal a formation that, despite millennia of erosion, maintains its eerily human proportions. Professional geologists have mapped and studied the pillar extensively, documenting its composition, stability, and rate of erosion. Remarkably, core samples reveal that this particular formation contains salt densities that make it more resistant to weathering than surrounding formations, a factor that may explain its longevity. The Israeli Nature and Parks Authority maintains access to the site while protecting it from excessive tourist damage. Warning signs in multiple languages caution visitors about the fragile nature of salt formations and the dangerous terrain surrounding Mount Sodom. Yet thousands make the pilgrimage annually, drawn by curiosity, faith, or simple geological interest. Local Bedouin guides continue to pass down oral traditions about the pillar that stretch back generations. For them, the distinction between natural formation and divine artifact remains irrelevant. The pillar serves as a landmark, both geographical and spiritual, a reference point that has oriented travelers for countless centuries. Modern scientific equipment has allowed researchers to study the pillar's internal structure without damaging it. Ground-penetrating radar reveals a solid salt composition with unusual crystalline patterns that create its stability. Yet even this scientific analysis can't definitively answer whether the formation represents normal geological processes or something more extraordinary. The pillar endures, neither growing nor completely eroding away, maintaining its vigil over the Dead Sea Basin, much as ancient witnesses described it. Science documents it, tourism commercializes it, but tradition still reveres it. As our journey through this remarkable landscape concludes, we find ourselves confronting the same questions that have challenged seekers for millennia. The evidence we've examined, geological, archaeological, historical, paints a picture that defies simple categorization. The biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction aligns remarkably with archaeological discoveries of catastrophic Bronze Age destruction in the Dead Sea Basin. Historical witnesses across cultures and centuries have documented the existence of the Salt Pillar, now known as Lot's wife. Geological analysis confirms that Mount Sodom represents one of Earth's most unique formations, capable of preserving salt pillars for extraordinary lengths of time. Whether we interpret Lot's wife's transformation as literal miracle or profound symbol, the pillar continues to stand as a testament to the consequences of hesitation in the face of divine calling. Its message transcends religious boundaries. There are moments when looking back toward what we're leaving costs us everything we might have gained. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this story isn't whether the pillar literally contains the remains of Lot's wife, but that it continues to provoke the same spiritual questions that have challenged humans throughout history. In our age of GPS navigation and satellite imagery, when mysteries seem increasingly rare, the Pillar of Salt maintains its enigma. The Dead Sea Basin preserves more than just archaeological artifacts. It preserves the intersection of faith and history, natural wonder and spiritual truth. Standing in that landscape where ancient drama unfolded, visitors consistently report a sense of standing at the crossroads between the material and eternal worlds. Science may never definitively prove or disprove the pillar's supernatural origins. Faith may never require such proof. But the formation itself, solitary, enduring, and strangely moving, continues to bear witness to truths larger than ourselves. As you reflect on this investigation into one of archaeology's most intriguing mysteries, remember that the greatest discoveries often emerge not from laboratories, but from landscapes, not from theories, but from the tangible places where human history intersects with divine purpose. The Pillar of Lot's wife stands today, as it has for millennia, a sentinel of salt overlooking the lowest place on earth, reminding us that even in the depths, even in the desert, even in judgment, there are monuments to truth waiting to be discovered. If this exploration has sparked your curiosity about the remarkable intersections between biblical accounts and archaeological evidence, subscribe to our channel for more investigations into the mysteries that bridge ancient faith and modern discovery. Share this video with friends who appreciate the ongoing dialogue between scripture and science, and hit that like button if you believe the past still speaks to those willing to listen. The desert keeps its secrets, but not from those who seek them.